Hi, I'm Kyle Atwell. I'm a physical therapist and a weightlifting enthusiast, and I've had a number of patients recently who have been interested in getting back into lifting and wanting to do so without experiencing pain and do so in a safe manner. So this video is really for them and hopefully anybody else that finds this information helpful. And what I'd like to do is over time go through the 4 big lifts, how to do that safely, how to progress safely as things improve, and give tips and tricks along the way. So I figured I'd start out with the squats, since that's been a big lift that a number of my patients have wanted to get back into. So we're gonna just go for it, and we're gonna start from positioning first, and then after positioning we'll talk about how you can work into ways to make sure that you maintain good form or position throughout the lift, and how to build into a deeper squat without losing that positioning over time. So first is the setup, essentially. And we're looking for a couple different things with the setup. We want to try and find a position that makes you feel powerful and also comfortable within your current range of motion. And so there's really no one size fits all squat position out there. And you can, if you search through YouTube and look at different lifters, both professional and recreational, you'll see a variability in form. And so what I want to start off with is trying to find your right lifting form. So we'll start with the bottom up. And one great tip that I learned along the way is trying to figure out how wide your toes should be. So a lot of people say that, oh, your feet should be perfectly straight. But actually, if you look at a lot of professional lifters, they've got a pretty good amount of toe out. And that tends to be the case because most people, especially males, tend to feel more powerful with their feet externally rotated a little bit, or their hips externally rotated a little bit. And that's true with me, and that'll probably be true with a lot of you. Some maybe feel more comfortable with a more straight on stance, but more of you will probably feel more comfortable with your feet and hips externally rotated a little bit. So a great way to figure this out is do a little bit of jumping. And think of, you could either do one big jump or try and jump towards the ceiling. And when you do a little bit of jumping, you should naturally notice where your feet tend to rotate towards. So for me, it's about 15, 20 degrees of toe out or hip external rotation. So to me, that feels like the most powerful position. I don't really feel that powerful when I'm straight on, so I like to actually be a little bit more rotated out. So that's a start, okay? So from there, you have to figure out how wide your stance needs to be. And so for the purpose of this video and future videos, we're really just going over basic squat form. Now, people will train in different stance widths to load their muscles in a different way. But for today, we're just going to talk about your normal squat stance. So to find that, we take that bit of toe out or hip external rotation, and then we try and feel what feels most comfortable when we're in a deep squat. So if I was more narrow, to me that doesn't feel as comfortable. I need to feel a little bit wider to feel like I'm more balanced and a little bit stronger in this position. So for me, that does end up being pretty much feet below or ankles below my hips with a little bit of that toe out. But you can play around with that and see what feels best to you. Okay, so once you find that, there's different strategies that you can use. If you're really trying to build good repetition, you could take a piece of tape, if you're doing this in your gym, and take a piece of tape, mark that distance off the floor, put that tape in the position that you're going to squat all the time, and that can be your training tool. Right? You can even do that, put a little piece of tape to mark how much external rotation your hips have, and then you can set up in that position every time as you're getting more comfortable. Okay, so once you've found where you feel most comfortable with your feet, okay, now we have to talk about what should be moving and what shouldn't be moving. So when you look at really efficient squatting, the object is to lift and lower this bar in a manner that the bar is just following on a perfectly vertical line. You don't want to see any swaying in the bar forward or backwards as you're moving up and down. So when we think about this, we really want to have a stationary upper body, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. And then just the hips, knees, and ankles moving. A lot of people get into trouble, at least the patients that I work with, where their spine moves under a load. And so that's the real key right now. We really don't want your spine to move under a load. We want your spine to be rigid under a load as your hips, knees, and ankles move, okay? So what I mean by that is when you're doing a squat, right, and this can change over time and hopefully will change over time for your benefit, but we want you to think of yourself as almost two separate parts, okay? So everything above the pelvis is one part, and that part doesn't move, okay? That part is locked into place. And everything below your pelvis, so your hips, knees, and ankles, that does move, okay? So when people get into problems, especially with the squat, they end up, as they're squatting, moving their back, mostly into this rounded type position. Some people end up getting overextended where their butt sticks out more and they get more arched. That tends to be probably more women that do that. Men are probably the opposite, where they get down and their back tends to round more. We really want to avoid any sort of motion at all when you're lifting. So when we set this up, what we want to think about is, as we put the bar into our back, we're going to kind of get into this little bit of forward tilt through the hips. That little bit of forward tilt is what you're going to aim to maintain, essentially the angle that your trunk is relative to the floor. You're going to try and maintain that angle throughout the entire lift, okay? So as we're trying to load up the bar and get it onto our back, there are a couple of ways we could do that. I think one of the easiest ways to start is the high bar position, or a high rack position, where you take the bar and you put it on the kind of like upper traps, the top part of your thoracic spine here. And that seems to be easiest because it allows you to keep your body in a more, or your trunk in a more upright position, okay? Some people end up going into what's called more of like a low bar position, where they try and rest the bar kind of in the middle trap area. You naturally end up getting more forward tilt through the pelvis in this position, which if you're already struggling with a little bit of overactivation in the paraspinals and maybe some back pain, that little extra bit of angle towards the floor may be more uncomfortable for you. So going into this high bar position where you're really stacked on top of your traps will probably be the easiest to reduce the amount of forward tilt that you have to start off with. So what we'll do is we'll set that up in a high bar, and then I'll show you as I squat, hopefully, that this bar tracks in a perfectly vertical line as I go down and as I go back up. And then with a little bit of load on that, that should look pretty much the same. And then we can talk about strategies too. Okay, what can you do if you cannot maintain that perfectly neutral spine all the way down to a full range? And we can use things like boxes or benches as a little bit of a barrier for you to work into over time. So we'll start here, and I'm gonna get in that high bar position. And when you get more and more weight on it, you'll feel the natural effect of the weight on your shoulders kind of gives you this natural forward tilt in the pelvis here. And so we'll probably call that maybe 10, 15 degrees of this little forward tilt. And so as I squat down, the bar from the side should look like it's moving in a perfectly straight line. And this should look the same regardless of how much weight I have on the bar. Now, another thing we should talk about, and maybe you saw it a little bit with some of those squats, is the myth of the knees staying behind the toes. I don't know where it started, but for a long time, pretty much everybody in my profession said you shouldn't have your knee go in front of your toe as you're doing a squat. And I think we should all know by now that that myth is actually not true. Your knee can and should go ahead of your toes to some extent, as long as the heel maintains contact with the ground when you're doing a squat. And if you look at some of the strongest people in the world, they are doing just that. It's because their body is made to be leveraged in that position. So don't feel like you need to keep your knees back. Let your hips sit straight down towards the floor, and by doing so, your knees will come over your toes a little bit. You don't really want to stay back there. You're going to be in an unbalanced position. You want to drop your hips straight towards the floor, okay? All right, so it should look the same with just a little bit of weight here. And so if we get back into that high bar again, get back into that stance, and if we do a little bit of, and you should feel a little bit of an easier ability to get that forward tilt, maintain that through. And we should have had the bar, same thing, look like it was tracking in a vertical line. So now that we've kind of got some of that form set up, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to stabilize a little bit as we are adding more load here. So what we want to do is, once we get our form, once we get our squat stance set up, we're going to try and activate our core in a certain way to hold our spine into a more rigid position. So as we get that stance that we're comfortable with, we want to think about kind of activating the core in a way that it feels like it's pulling in and stabilizing the spine. Not that we're dropping down like that, right? Chest is going to stay up, but we're sucking in here, and we're going to start that as soon as we lift the bar off. So get into that position, get that nice neutral spine, pull the core in, get that little bit of forward tilt going there, and then lower the hips to the floor and try and get that straight vertical motion of the bar as we lift back up. Okay, so let's say that you can't actually maintain good form all the way down to the bottom position. Let's say that at about here, maybe 100 or so degrees of knee flexion, you feel like your back wants to start to round. If that's the case, and you know that, you can either short the depth of your squat until your range of motion improves, and we'll talk a little bit more in another video about how, strategies, stretches, mobilizations that you can do to try and improve that specific squat form depth. But if you're not exactly comfortable with that muscle memory of it, you can film yourself and take note of the height at which you can maintain that perfectly good squat form. And then you can see if you can find an object, maybe a box or a box with some plates stacked on it, where you can have essentially a barrier to allow you to squat down to and then come back up, almost like think of like the bumpers in a bowling alley, right? You have your little bumpers set up so that you know that you can't go past your range of motion capabilities. So what it might look like, let's say we use this box. And let's say I've determined that that's the distance that I can squat down without losing my form. So I'm going to use that as a bit of a training device. And over time, I can shorten the height of this box by using smaller plates or lowering as my range of motion improves. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll get this set up here. And it's the same exact setup, except now we're going to feel the box as we squat down, and that's going to tell us that that's as far as we can go. And we're just tapping down, we're not actually sitting on it. As your range of motion improves over time, we can start to take more and more of that box away, so you can go deeper and deeper as your range of motion improves. So I think we've pretty much covered a good majority of things. If you have any specific questions, you can leave them in the comments below, and I can try and answer them in future videos. And hopefully we'll be posting more on how to improve the range of motion with the squat, and then going over safe strategies for other big lifts like the deadlift, press, and bench. Thank you.